Record. All right. You're now a movie star, but don't feel nervous. So Rachelle, I'd like to begin our conversation is tell us a little bit about how you felt about this journey.
Um, I was really excited to, take it on and go through the material. I was actually surprised at how frustrating it would get at times with how dense everything was. So I thought, oh, this is an exciting topic, but there was like a lot of material, and sometimes it would get like kind of overwhelming with all the information. But I always found like after I got through it, I was always like felt blessed and encouraged, and it was really good.
So you see why we encourage you to read it recreationally.
Yeah.
Read the things that caught your attention, but sometimes it gets so interesting if you love history and the events that were taking place. I know it can be hard to stop. We have an interesting history in our church, don't we?
We do. Yes.
Yeah. So as you sit down and, we had the six uh, topics for you to write on, I want to thank you for the work that you did. I mean, you took that really serious and worked through each one of those topics. Um, when you looked at this concept of the doctrine of justification, did anything stand out new to you as you went on this journey, Rochelle?
Um, I remember having a conversation with the pastor that I was interning with about like the I'm trying to think of what you call it, but like Christ and like if he took on our humanity, like the post fall or pre fall
Uh-huh.
humanity. And I thought that was really interesting to read about that because like he just briefly mentioned that when we were talking, and then like doing a little bit more study in that. That was something that I didn't see the connection between righteousness and by faith, and like how that played a part into that. So that was interesting to me.
Uh-huh. Very good. Um, so in the journey, I mean, you were very comprehensive. You do realize that if you did this 1.5 spaces or 2 spaces, you've got your first paper published. um, how do you feel about the fact that when you looked at our history, we came into existence by a group of young people. I think the oldest was like 24, youngest was like 17. When you look at our core in our early movement, uh, do you find it interesting that they moved over the years into this kind of argument about how important the law was and arguing the importance of the Sabbath? How we kind of moved into that form of legalism. And then, I mean, if we were formed in the early 1860s and now here we are in 1888, all of a sudden the gospel just comes in and just kind of explodes right in the middle of this we're right, you're wrong kind of theology. What did you think of that history?
It was new for me to like learn all that history, and I thought that was really fascinating as well. Um, I think it just shows like where like our priorities differ from God's, especially because I think we get caught up on the things like Sabbath and how like, oh, this is the true message here, and we forget that the true message is God's grace and Jesus dying on the cross, and how when we accept his gift, then we do the law, and it goes together, not separate. So
It is fascinating. Do you think we still struggle a little bit with that approach in our evangelism?
yeah. I mean, I haven't been to like an actual evangelistic like meeting, but from what I've heard, I think it can go either way. Sometimes we focus a lot on God's righteousness, and Christ's righteousness, but then sometimes I think we tend to focus on the little things and the legalism.
Uh, so in in our modern church today, contemporary church, where we're sitting, um, how do you feel we have done with justification and sanctification as a faith journey, both of them being a gift. Are you third generation or fourth generation Adventist?
I think I'm fifth generation.
Oh, excuse me. My goodness, you should live on the East Coast, where you can trace your ancestors for 300 years. So fifth generation. So do you find this to be a normal conversation in your family then?
I don't know, when I looked at this topic, I find a lot of mixed like signals when it comes to this topic. So there's certain things it's like, oh yes, like, we can't work to earn salvation, but at the same time, we don't always think about like sanctification also being God's work. So I think it's the difference between like justification and sanctification. Sometimes we focus more on sanctification being done by our own works versus like God's works. So yeah,
I
that's what I've
that,
noticed.
yeah, and I, I found that same thing to be true at large, just in the general body of the church. And I'm not saying that in a critical way. I just am saying that because we have a true humanity. Um, isn't it interesting that we had the legalism first and then the gospel follow, whereas Israel had deliverance by faith and then legalism followed. So in a strange way, God let us sort of confront the legalism first and then experience the gospel second. Um, do you, do you see that in that perspective as having merit? And maybe there's a reason God allowed that to be just the opposite.
Um, I mean, I'm guessing there's a reason. I know something, I think when they were talking about like Paul and Romans about how we try to like work, like God lets us kind of try to earn our salvation in some ways. So then when we finally like realize we can't, then we appreciate his salvation more. So there's like something about that, but I don't know.
Yeah. Was for you, when you went through the research, did you find some comfort in the nature of Christ, looking at Christ being able to fully identify and understand who we are as human beings? How did you feel when you got through that section of the research and wrote your paper?
I found it comforting. I think it's something that I've struggled with, especially with the whole like last generation theology. I was getting a little bit confused with like how this all put together. Because I think some people get scared when we talk about the Christ being the same as us. I don't know. It's just like so that was the part that I found was really heavy for me, like a heavy topic.
Uh-huh.
But I do find it encouraging. Like to me, I think it's a joy that Christ shared in our nature, and that like we have that I can relate to. He relates to us, and I think that's a blessing.
Well, yeah, and I think in our previous interview we had that same conversation, that there is a sense of joy knowing a Savior who knows us, who understands us, uh,
Hmm.
and that's part of the reason we put this into the project, because our goal is to say 10 years from now, wherever you are doing ministry, that we can bring a holistic gospel that brings people that sense of hope that you're speaking about, to know that God knows them intimately and understands them. And I'm glad I enjoyed your portion of the paper on that. So um, when we get to the current situation where we're at with our history today, um, we're a long ways away from 1888.
Yes.
We're all, I mean, are we a long ways away from the Lord coming? Have we really embraced the message with a sense of both urgency, with a sense of the Holy Spirit's dynamic? Are we really ready to take this message, do you think, to the world?
I don't think we're at that point yet. from, I don't know, that's just my experience with the church. I don't think we've embraced that message completely. At least not how it's depicted with like Jones and Wagner and Ellen White, like how they talk about it, and I think where it could have gone then in 1888.
Why do you? I mean, the answer to that is obvious because of who we are as human beings. Um, have you thought about, as you know, you're going to be a senior next year? Have you thought about how you're going to meet that challenge? How do we take and move your congregations that you're called to, or your areas of ministry that you're called to? Have you thought about how this is going to be a significant portion of what you do?
I have. I mean, I think it's the main message that we should be preaching. So even if we're talking about other stories in the Bible, like it's still center around the message of righteousness by faith. And at least that's how I look at it. And so I think it's just constantly having that reminder, in ministry of it's not our works that earn salvation, but it's God's works in us. And God's patient, thankfully. So I think there has to be some patience in ministry as well as we, work through that.
So, Rachelle, I, a couple of our board members have, I've always appreciated their observation of the children's story. And I have almost come to the conclusion that most of our legalism is actually taught in the children's story. That if you do A, B, C, you can make God happy. If you do this, that there's a benefit, a reward for your behavior. It's just so, I'm just saying, it's just so interesting that I have, over the last 30 plus years, have had some very cringing moments in which the sermon is exactly the opposite of the children's story. I don't know if you've experienced that.
Yeah, I've actually noticed that. And that's something I've been thinking about, especially now that I have my own kid.
You
Like
are
even just thinking about like a
you
lot
are
of the
froze
children's
up at the
books.
moment.
What? Oh, sorry. Could you repeat that? Oh,
Rachelle, can you?
kind of.
Oh, you're back.
Yep.
I don't. We're not sure if it was yours or ours that broke the connection.
I don't know. I only saw myself for a second there, so I don't know what
Yeah.
happened.
Well, we sort of lost you on the children's story, but we got part of what you had to say about it. So, Rachelle, let's. Do you have two children or just one?
No, just one.
That's your first child.
Yeah.
And so you're on this journey now as a parent. And one thing about ministry is that, usually your first work is in the children. One of the greatest challenges we have is how do we convey this message to our children? We have a friend who's a teacher up in Spokane, and he's discovered that he teaches this at the beginning of the year, and this is 7th and 8th grade, 9th grade. And then he has to do it again in the springtime because it's like oh, they're all excited and they get it and then they lose it. And then they come back and they get it again.
Hmm.
And it's so I have no doubt that it has something deeply to do with our nature. So when you look at how the message has impacted you, um, how do you think this is going to impact those around you?
I think should have a positive impact on people. This message, because I mean, I personally find it really freeing and joyful. So I would just hope that like when other people understand it, that they would experience that as well.
Okay. Um, in in this journey, how do you perceive, and I'm trying to enlarge this question and still keep it fairly concise, how do you see us finding a way to do our outreach and make our first contact be about Jesus' gift of righteousness by faith? How do we change our pattern? How do we develop a new approach to this?
Um,
That's
I
a
think,
go ahead.
I mean, that's a hard question, but I
Mhm.
think making that more of a priority for our own lives, and then also when we preach or do evangelism, like that should be our priority before we talk about the Sabbath and different things. It should be first like Christ's righteousness and what He's done for us.
Did you get a chance to, and this is again taking you back a little bit, did you get a chance to look at the article of false justification by faith? And in summary, what Ellen White is saying is that you can actually make your faith a thing to make God love you more, that it becomes meritorious or a form of merit or good works. Did you get a chance to glance at that? It's just a 4 or 5 page article, I think, that was in the review.
I think I did glance through that. I don't remember it real well, but
Okay, then we'll pass on that. To me, it just seems like um, our faith message today almost becomes compatible traditionally with our behavioral theology. Somehow our faith has been diminished down to just another behavior.
yeah, I think I remember reading that now that you brought that up. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
I can see. I think that has been something that happens, and it's that other extreme, I guess, of um, making faith just another works.
yeah, another duty.
Yep.
Um, and the other thing I want to commend you on in the paper, genuinely appreciate the fact that in your paper, um, which is vitally important, is you have kept justification and sanctification together. Um, One of my conference presidents used the term that there are two sides of the same coin. So I want to affirm you and thank you in doing that, because you cannot talk about justification without God's work of sanctification. So I really, really appreciated that. It just shows additional insight in your understanding of the topic. So, Rachelle, how are you feeling so far?
I'm feeling good.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
We weren't too tough on you.
No.
All right. So when we put this to the board, the last thing I ask is, Rachelle, is there anything you would like to say to the board about this experience you've had so far?
I think that it definitely helped my own relationship with God more than I thought it would. It challenged it, but it also helped it grow in a lot of ways, and it made me realize um, how this is an area that I struggle with a lot more than I realized I did. And I'm thankful that God's still working with me on that. So
Excellent. All right. Um, Again, I want to thank you. This is a huge amount of work. Um, I hope that the school automatically gave you all A's because you're a new mom. Excuse me, that is that legalism? A reward for good behavior? No, I'm only kidding. Um, so thank you so much. We're going to put this to the board. We, by the way, have added PUC onto this.
Okay.
So we have a new project coming on with PUC. So you are now part of 4 different universities in this scholarship. So we're excited about that. You should hear from us. We don't have a date yet for our board meeting. We'll probably have that in what, a couple of weeks, you think, Sherry? So you should be hearing back from us. Any other questions or thoughts?
I don't think so. So yeah.
All right, very good. Well, again, just a short prayer.
Okay.
And in this prayer, I'm going to pray for special strength as a parent for you.
Oh, thank you.
Sherry and I were raised by 4 children, and they did the best they could, Rachelle. and you're discovering what that means.
Yep.
All right, let's pray.